Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to our second session of the S2S4E Energy Day. This day is a part of the European Sustainable Energy Week, and we are having three online sessions today. So this is our second session, and we are here now with Hannah Bloomfield. Anna is a postdoctoral research scientist at the University of Reading. She has completed her PhD in energy meteorology group, looking at the impacts of climate variability and climate change on the Great Britain power system. Since then, she's worked into climate services projects. The first looked at the risk associated with large European windstorms to the insurance sector. And her current work looks at the potential of subseasonal and seasonal forecasts to be used within the energy sector as part of the S2S4E project team. In this project, Anna is involved in developing energy indicators for use in the Decision Support Tool, which is the operational tool that the S2S4E project has been developing, and in creating weather patterns forecasts for use in the energy sector. So just a technical remark, you can pose questions at any time in the chat. I may pick some during the presentation or most likely at the end. Also, the webinar is recorded, and you will find it. You'll find the recording available online together with handouts. We'll also send you an email later on with all the relevant material. And so, thank you very much, Anna, for being here with us. I leave you the floor.
Thanks, Ilaria. Right, I'll just turn my camera off so you get to look at the slides, not me. There we go. Great, yeah, so thank you all for coming. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about, in this second webinar, some climate forecasts for the summer season. Okay, so yeah, an overview of what I'm going to be talking about today. Firstly, we're just going to go through, in the style of the standard seasonal S2S4E webinars, we're going to look through the weather from May and look at how the S2S4E Decision Support Tool performed. Then we'll go on to look at some sub-seasonal forecasts for June this month and see what we've potentially got in store. Then into the title of the talk, will this be a particularly hot summer? And what are the expectations for renewable energy production? Followed by summary and questions. I'm just going to close T so you don't get 100 while we're talking. Okay, so just to check we're on the same page, this S2S4E project stands for Subseasonal to Seasonal Prediction for Energy. And the window we're kind of focused on here is anything out from around 10 days to multiple months. So on the demonstrator, which hopefully you will either have been familiar with from the last webinar or from looking at it previously, you can get forecasts from 1 to 4 weeks ahead, and then also out for the next 3 months. So these forecasts are for either weather variables relevant for energy, such as temperature, wind speeds, precipitation, or for some energy indicators themselves, such as wind power, solar power, hydropower, and energy demand. Some of these are still in progress, but most of these are now available on the DST. So what we're not trying to do is do a very short-term weather forecast for the next couple of days ahead, because there are very good weather forecasting models you can use to do this rather than the extended range forecasts. And we're also not trying to make projections, I should say, multiple years or decades into the future. So, firstly, let's just go for a review of the weather in May. How did the Decision Support Tool perform? So, firstly, to put some context from the reanalysis, May was quite an interesting month, which a lot of us might be more aware of than usual, as a lot of us have spent it in our homes rather than at work. But May 2020, as we can see from these plots, which are anomaly plots from temperature and precipitation anomalies over Europe, these are taken from the JRA 55 reanalysis. So what we're looking at is, with a reference period of 2000 to 2020, how May compared to the previous years. And we use this quite short reference period because of the global warming signals that are present. It gives a more accurate representation of the anomalies. So we see that it was actually very warm across quite a large chunk of Europe. Across the UK, southern France, Spain and Portugal experienced very warm temperatures, whereas it was generally quite cool in Scandinavia and Eastern Europe. In terms of precipitation, it was very dry. Notice the colour bars the other way up for this one, so red is low rather than high now. So precipitation, it was very dry for the UK and for Ireland and across big parts of Central Europe. So quite an interesting month. Particularly interesting for those of us that live in the UK. So we saw the sunniest spring on record throughout the UK with 695 hours of sunshine. It was exceptionally dry with very low river levels and reservoir levels across the UK, but very sunny. So these are some plots that have come from the Met Office website just to show how anomalous this month was for the UK. And we had quite a lot of solar generation in the UK this month, which was very interesting, making it quite difficult to balance the grid with some challenging energy conditions during the COVID period. So now we've seen the general overview, let's have a look at how May performed in the sub-seasonal forecasts. So I've just picked a week to look at, the 25th to the 31st of May, which was a very sunny week in Europe. Generally, particularly those parts that I'd highlighted in the previous plot that were warm. So just to flag an update to the DST, which some of you may already be aware of, but the sub-seasonal forecasts are now provided from the ECMWF model. So in previous webinars that Ilias had presented in spring, I believe we were still using the NCEP CFS sub-seasonal model. Whereas we've now updated so that the sub-seasonal forecasts are from ECMWF and so are the seasonal forecasts. So we've now got some continuity between the sub-seasonal and seasonal model. And analysis that the scientists have done in the project has shown that generally there is a little bit more skill in the ECMWF sub-seasonal model than we were seeing in NCEP when validating against ERA 5. So hopefully this should mean that more useful information is available for the users. See the DST for more details on this. So let's look at some forecasts. So just to check everyone's on the same page for how to look at these plots, if they're not familiar to you. Each plot is showing a forecast for a different week. So if a forecast is for week 1, it will mean it has been issued, a forecast issued in the previous week. So in this case, I've picked a forecast issued on May the 21st. So the number of the week number is how many weeks lead time from the validation date we're at. And on these top rows, we've got forecasts of 2-meter temperature, and on the bottom rows, forecasts of surface solar radiation. So we can see that the forecasts here in week 1 for 2-meter temperatures, we saw something that looked very similar to that validation plot I had for May, that generally it's very warm in these forecasts over the UK, France, Spain and Portugal, which is exactly what we saw, and relatively cooler over Eastern Europe. However, we didn't see much signal in the north of Europe like we did in the overall May pattern. This signal was still present 2 weeks ahead, and I should highlight here what these colours mean. So we're looking at tercile forecasts here, so the probability of being in the upper or lower tercile. Upper is red, lower is blue. If it's a small dot, so there's lots of different sizes here, hopefully you can see. A small dot means you're in a kind of 34 to 49% probability of something happening. A bigger dot means there's 50 to 100% probability. And the triangles represent the extremes. So for the extreme to be shown with the triangle, we need 25% of the forecast members to think that an extreme will happen. An extreme is in the top or bottom 10% of these forecasts. So week 2 for the temperatures looks reasonably consistent with week 1 for these extreme temperatures to be seen across parts of Western Europe. But a bit less of the signal is seen over Eastern Europe here. And as we extend out into week 3 and 4, we're no longer seeing the signals for the extremes in Central and Southern Europe, which we might have expected. There was a little bit of a false signal up here for very cold temperatures in Northern Europe. But generally, the temperature forecast here was very good. There was even useful information, if you look at the colours, out to week 3 and week 4, that it was going to be warm over southwestern Europe. For solar radiation, so generally, again, South and Eastern Europe was generally in this upper tercile in the validation. So southwestern Europe was in the upper tercile. So if we look here, the forecast in week 1 was actually very good for the UK, France and Germany here. It saw this kind of very extreme sunny event that happened in the UK. Although for the UK high sunshine week, it didn't see it much further out than 1 week ahead. For some parts of France and Germany, it did see the signs of an extreme. But this just highlights that this is a field that's a little bit more difficult to predict within the models, the surface solar radiation. So generally, I'd say quite a good subseasonal forecast we had for that week in May. They perform in the seasonal forecasts. So what we've taken here is the forecast issued in April, the forecast issued in March for 2 months ahead, and the forecast issued in February for 3 months ahead. So we see here that generally across Europe, there isn't much signal in these seasonal forecasts in month 1 for these forecasts issued in April. And this looks like it would have been a pretty climatologically average month. Most of the signals here sit over the oceans rather than over the land. So interestingly, if we were to have looked at the forecasts in February and March, there's this strong signal here that there were going to be anomalously warm temperatures in the North Sea, which then with only 1 month ahead, this signal dropped out. So this just shows the importance of keeping an eye on these forecasts as they develop through time. So yeah, maybe not such a forecast for this very extreme May, but there are some regions here where you start to see some strong signals which validated reasonably well against the results. So let's have a look at what the DST is showing us as the outlook for this month, for June. The forecasts here that I've taken for the DST are using the ECMWF extended range ensemble, and they were all issued on June the 4th. So I think, yeah, I took these all off DST last Friday. So week 1 is validating kind of this week, week 2 next week, and so on. So firstly, let's look at some temperatures and wind speed forecasts. So generally, it looks like from the DST, this week should be generally reasonably cold over parts of southern France, Spain and Portugal, and over the UK. We've got this kind of east-west dipole of temperatures here, where over Eastern Europe it looks like it has the potential to be very warm. Following through into week 2 of the temperature forecast, it looks like it could potentially be quite warm over Scandinavia. This big region of extreme temperatures could be a sign that there'll be a big blocking event to occur, but in order to confirm that, we'd need to look at some more large-scale plots of fields like geopotential height and mean sea level pressure, but that's potentially there. Also some anomalously warm temperatures in Central Europe and over the UK. Still reasonably cool though in France and Portugal in week 2. Similar signals are seen out for week 3 and 4. The spatial pattern looks similar, that's just much weaker. So potentially for June in terms of temperatures, it could be relatively cool for parts of Southern Europe, particularly France and France, particularly Spain and Portugal, but a bit warmer over northern Europe there. In terms of wind speeds, it looks like if you look across Europe as a whole, that particularly over Eastern Europe, it could be quite a low wind week this week, with quite a lot of extreme low temperatures over parts of Romania, Croatia, Ukraine. So yeah, potentially low wind over those regions. Also low wind over parts of Sweden and Norway in this first week. But although it might be cold in Spain and Portugal, there's potentially some high wind speeds over this region. Extreme wind speeds in week 1 potentially to be seen there. If we look out into the further weeks, week 2 wind speeds, not much to say really in weeks 2, 3 and 4. There's generally some spattering of low winds over Scandinavia, and maybe still some regions of high winds over France and Spain, but not that much that we can say with confidence in these wind speed forecasts yet. So now let's look at the solar radiation. Although previous weeks have been very sunny, it looks like this week over parts of the UK, France, Germany and Spain and Italy are going to be reasonably cloudy by the look of it, with extremely low solar radiation for the time of year across most of Europe in week 1. Going out to week 2, we then see that this signal persists across kind of France and Spain, that it could still be quite cloudy in those regions, but across Finland and parts of northern Russia potentially it might be quite sunny. And over Eastern Europe as well, there's some spatterings of sunshine through Latvia, Lithuania, Romania there. Not much to say there in weeks 3 and 4. There's not any particularly strong signals to be seen. So in terms of precipitation, the colours here, blue means wetter than usual and yellow means drier than usual. So we see that while it is quite cloudy over France, Spain and the UK, it's also quite wet. So potentially in the next week some wet rain to be coming, and much more rain than usual by the number of extremes there, which pass all the way through. There's almost a line, isn't there, drawing through Spain all the way through Italy and up through to Latvia and Lithuania there. It looks like it could also be a bit drier than usual over Norway and Sweden for the first week here. This wet signal persists in week 2 for parts of France and northern Spain and southern UK, so potentially more rain for the coming weeks. And then there isn't much signal in weeks 3 and 4 for what we can see in June. So overall, June potentially could be a bit colder than usual from parts of Central and Southern Europe, with the potential for some rain and lower solar radiation levels than usual for the western parts of Europe. So now for the title of this talk, I guess, will it be a hot summer over Europe? So let's have a look at the seasonal forecasts for this. So these seasonal forecasts are taken for the ECMWF seasonal SEAS5 model, and plots are shown similar to before. The colours still mean the same things. So now we've got 3 months. We've got the forecast for June, July and August, and these are forecasts all launched in May from the DST. So if we first look at June, we see high probabilities of below normal temperatures for parts of France and Italy. So this is very similar to what we were seeing in those sub-seasonal forecasts. But when this is now averaged over the whole month, we lose that signal in Spain and Portugal. So that's one of the few things you can see over the land. We see that over Germany, Poland, Austria, and lots of Eastern European countries, temperatures look very close to climatological average, with nothing to see there. If we look out to July, there is a very high probability of above normal temperatures through Greece, Romania, and Bulgaria, and there is quite a reasonable skill level with this. I'm not going to speak much about skill in this talk, but the key thing to note is these maps show areas where the fair, for those who are interested, the fair rank probability skill scores are greater than 0, And on the DST, with every forecast, the skill level of these forecasts is available. So advanced users can have a little look and see how confident these predictions are. But I guess the key thing to point out here that these forecasts for Greece, Romania and Bulgaria have up to 10% skill level, so that's actually reasonably high skill for these forecasts at this time of year. If we look out to August, we start to see that, again, parts of France, Germany and Italy are having below normal temperatures. Even a couple of extreme flags have come in there for the time of year. But over parts of Eastern Europe, there's still these very warm temperatures that can be seen. Not much to report over Scandinavia, really. Generally, there's some small regions for various months where it might be a bit warmer than average, but potentially this will be close to an average summer of temperatures for Northern Europe. So overall, potentially it's not going to be a particularly warm summer for parts of Central Europe, the UK and Spain and Portugal. But in Eastern Europe, it has the potential to be quite warm and sunny. So that's nice. So we know that we know our now expectations for temperature based on the DST. So now what is interesting to complement this are the expectations for renewable energy production. So let's have a look through these. So firstly, let's look at some wind speed forecasts. If we look at June 2020, we firstly see a high probability here of above normal wind speeds in Turkey with quite a high skill level. So potentially very windy in this region. Across more of the Central Europe, Northern and Southern, there's not any particularly strong signals here. Potentially high wind over Southern Italy and some low wind speeds present in Southern France. If we then look at July 2020, we start to see high probabilities of below normal wind speeds in some of the Baltic countries, and there's quite a good skill level present in those forecasts. And then this continues out into August in the Baltic, still reasonably high probabilities of low wind speeds. So here are the wind speed forecasts. What's interesting is, with relevance to wind power, is to where the wind turbines are located. So I can now put on this plot from our DST where we believe the wind turbines to be located across Europe, and we can relate that to the forecasts that we are now seeing. So this is a flag available on the DST. You're able to plot on the location of the renewable generation. So the bigger that little wind turbine is on the plot, the more renewable generation we believe to be in that grid box. So interestingly, what we see from these forecasts is over most of the regions where the renewable energy is located, there isn't much of a signal in the forecasts. Some exceptions to this, I'm trying to spot potentially Italy, where we've got the flag there. There might be a bit more renewable generation. But yeah, generally in the locations where the renewable energy is installed, close to climatological conditions look to be present in these summer forecasts. We look at the solar radiation now. So this is not the solar power, just the solar radiation. We actually see quite a high probability of below normal solar radiation in Germany, Belgium and northern France. This was similar to what we saw in June for the subseasonal forecasts, so this complements that result. But also a very high probability, this time throughout all the months, of above normal solar radiation in Ukraine, Greece and Romania. So these were also regions where the forecast, I believe, said it was going to be pretty warm. We can just check that. Yeah, so over Eastern Europe, consistent forecasts of warm temperatures and high solar radiation over Eastern Europe. Other regions of interest, let's have a look. Across Northern Europe, again, forecast close to climatological average. But in July, there's potential for some quite sunny weather over Germany and over Poland. And then in August as well, over Poland, there's quite a lot of sunshine present there. Also over Spain and Portugal, there's potentials for some, in July and August, some very high amounts of solar radiation. So how is that relevant for the solar energy? Now I've put little sunshines on the plots where we believe the largest amounts of solar power to be installed. Obviously, this is difficult to locate because there's lots of different potential for rooftop PV, but also I don't think the databases are quite as good for the locations of these. But what we can see here that generally in the regions where we know there to be PV generation, the UK is somewhere that's potentially going to be affected in June for it being a little bit less sunny than usual. There might be lower PV generation. Anywhere across Eastern Europe where there's PV, it potentially will be generating very well because of the high amounts of solar radiation present then. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say about that. So precipitation forecasts for the next 3 months. There's potentially a high probability of below normal precipitation in the English Channel that we can see in June, also in parts of Moldova and Ukraine, with lower skill than the other fields, but still significant skill over these regions. If we look through July, there's a higher probability of below normal precipitation for Spain and parts of Romania. And then in August, we see this high probability of below normal precipitation for southern France and northern Spain, with a reasonable skill threshold there. So the general picture for precipitation is it looks like it might be a relatively dry summer. I think there's a lot more yellow on this plot for the dry than there is blue. Regions that might be an exception to that is we see that in Germany in June and August it looks like there might be some quite wet weather present there. I'm not sure of the skill level on that forecast. I'm not going to talk to you about hydro forecast. If you're interested in that, I would advise you go to the next webinar on hydropower forecast and the Nordic power markets. So yeah, I advise you have a look at that, either online with the recordings or in an hour or so's time. So after look at these portions, these forecasts, what I'd like to end with is maybe a note of caution. So a lot of you maybe have followed the DST through its development and have come to previous webinars in winter and spring. What I'd like to say is that extended range and seasonal prediction systems do not have uniform skill throughout the year. And summer is a time which is quite complex for the forecasts. So regions that you might have grown to have quite good confidence in for the forecast in winter could be different now. And I've just put a plot in here from one of our deliverable reports from S2S4E. What this is showing is for each month of the year, which is what all the little letters are, JFM, etc., the skill level for different weeks of the sub-seasonal forecast, which are given in the colours. And maybe if you focus on wind power for Norway, you can see maybe there are some stark changes here in the general skill level of the forecast with month. This absolutely doesn't mean there's no skill. There's still some very good skill in summer, as you can see from this plot, but it needs to be taken into account when you look at these forecasts. So if this is something that's of interest to you, I suggest you head to the S2S4E website, where all our scientific deliverable reports are available, I believe. But I know that this one is deliverable 4.1, which I've got here, which is benchmarking skill assessment of current subseasonal and seasonal forecasts for users. So this report's really nice. It's got maps of which parts of Europe have higher and lower skill for various variables. And it also gives some case studies. So if there's particular events you're interested in, you can see the kind of information the DST is able to supply. So just to summarise, the DST was able to capture some elements of the enormously warm and sunny May, which we experienced at sub-seasonal timescales. The temperature forecasts were actually very good 4 weeks out. Solar radiation, potentially out to 2 weeks. We had some useful signals there in that field. So during June, we may see warm temperatures over Northern Europe and low wind speeds over Central Europe. And for the coming summer, it has the potential to be warm over the Mediterranean and Eastern Europe with cooler conditions in Central Europe. For wind power generation, I think from what we've seen, we're expecting it to be close to climatological based on these forecasts. However, there are some potential for increased regions of solar generation in parts of Central and Eastern Europe. And as I just said, if you're interested in skill level of these forecasts, please do have a look on our website and at some of the deliverable reports. So thank you very much for listening. If you've got any questions, I'm happy to take them now. If not, please get in touch with us. So thank you.
Thanks to you, Hannah. Before we go to the Q&A, while our attendees are posing questions in the chat, I like to remind everyone that we'll share presentation and recording of this webinar, as well as next Monday, the next Outlook will be available on the S2S4E website. And finally, I'd like to ask you to reply our short survey that will be posted in the chat and that you received in your inbox. So thanks a lot. We can go to the Q&A. First of all, we have a question on what difference does it make changing from NCEP CFS to the ECMWF model in the DST?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We had a lot of questions about this in previous webinars in terms of why we had different forecasting systems. So one difference it could make is that if you've got models running from different forecasting centres, so the NCEP model we had from weeks 1 to 4, and then we had the ECMWF model for months 1, 2 and 3, it sometimes meant the forecasts didn't look exactly concurrent. So the patterns we were seeing in the subseasonal didn't necessarily agree with what we were seeing in month 1 of the seasonal forecasts, based around the fact that they were different models generating them. So now that we have the same modelling centre providing the forecasts, it allows you to bridge that gap between the subseasonal and the seasonal forecasts with a bit more confidence, because the information you're getting should look more similar.
Great, thanks a lot. One more question is from Tobias, and is asking, didn't you use the latest EC seasonal of 5th of June? The dry might be updated now.
Yes, true. The forecast I think I got was from, I think I took these forecasts on Friday. There might be another forecast that is out this morning, but I haven't checked the DST this morning, so there might be a more up-to-date forecast now. But I believe it takes around a day to process on the DST. But yeah, always good to check the most up-to-date forecasts which are available and to compare to the last ones to see which signals are still present.
Yeah, actually, to add on this, at the moment in the DST, we update them only once per week. So on Thursday and on Friday, we have the newest one for Subseasonal. Is now operational, but still on a research project phase. So after the end of the project, which is in November this year, we hope we launch the service commercially, and then updates of the subseasonal forecast will be available on Monday and Tuesday, and the seasonal forecast will be available at the beginning of each month.
Nice.
Yes, follow our Outlook next Monday with the newest forecast. So one more question that comes from the audience is, why was it so warm and sunny across May for Western Europe? Could the models capture the process?
Yeah, that's quite a good question. So across, well, from the UK perspective anyway, we had a lot of periods of anticyclonic blocking. So we had high pressure systems which were kind of sitting over those regions, which allowed it to stay very warm and sunny through the whole the later kind of period there. So does the models capture these processes is quite a fundamental question, and this is what some of the scientists in S2S4E have been starting to look at, because if the models are able to do this, if they can get the large scale meteorology better, Then some of these surface fields that we're looking at, grid point based wind and solar, will then be able to predict with a lot more confidence. I'm not sure if the models exactly captured this event, but we know that generally some of the models find it quite difficult to simulate these kind of blocking style patterns. So yeah, with model improvements and with more scientific work on how we can relate these large scale features to what's happening at the surface, we should be able to get better forecasts. And that's what some of the S2S4E team are now working on.
Thank you very much, Anna. I think it was very clear. So for now, we have answered all the questions, but we stay available for more questions. So today we have seen in our first webinar the challenges of visualizing climate forecast and how this was addressed in the development of the decision support tool of the S2S4E project. Now Anna took us through the DST in action for the summer outlook. And in half an hour, well, in 1 hour at 1:30, we'll have a zoom into the Nordic power market. So we wait you for the next session. We thank you again, Anna, for the great presentation. And yes, see you later. Have a nice day, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.